everyone. Jake Greenstein here, partner at HiveMind Capital, Web3 focused investment firm. Longtime lover of data. I started my career as an engineer and then worked at MasterCard. And I'm thrilled to bring up Bill Daig, Vice President and Head of Product at NASDAQ. Third one here. Awesome. Bill, pleasure to get up here on the stage with you. Ignore that. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bill Daig, I lead data product for NASDAQ. So my team is responsible for all of our market data, all of the alternative data, and our data platform. So we're really focused on how do we bring unique, new, innovative kind of content to market. Our market data is used globally. Obviously, NASDAQ exchange data powers platforms around the world. I think we like to say we touch over 1 billion people a day use our data in one form or another. But that's a behemoth, right? And so how do you innovate there? And so as I think about my role with data products, I am always thinking about how can we continue to be more agile? And that's where things like the alternative data business and our platform, which is NASDAQ Data Link, come into play. So that's how we're kind of evolving the business. I'm really focused on agility and innovation for the data business.
Awesome. Bill, we were talking earlier and we were saying how data is more than just a collection of numbers. It's a product and it needs to be valuable and accessible. Can you talk about what makes data valuable and then what a successful data product looks like beyond that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the concepts we're really kind of crystallizing around in the data business is this idea of like data as a product. And I don't just mean like, data is something that we sell, but it's like looking at all of the data assets across the organization, even across the company, as kind of internally treating them like you would treat something that you're going to commercialize. And so this means bring the same level of rigor to all of your internal data assets that you would bring to something that you're going to sell and market. So this like data should have support, should have documentation, should be QA'd, should have a reliable pipeline. Should be accessible, discoverable, and governable. And so we're bringing kind of that philosophy all the way down the stack, all the way upstream from where our products, that hit the market. And that actually gives us a lot of practice with how do we commercialize data sets quickly. And so that's something that we're really, really interested in is kind of this data productization process. And that's a really powerful abstraction. I think the other part of the question is, what makes a good data product? And that's obviously all about the content. So data needs to be a good product. In my opinion, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be timely, it needs to be relevant and unique. So reliable, it's got to show up on time, it has to be ready, it has to be trustworthy, I have to be able to make business decisions on the front line. So that's important. It needs to be accurate. If you're measuring something, how well you're measuring it. Again, it kind of speaks to the reliability. Timely, this is a big one. Data has to show up. The frequency with which you're measuring something and the lag matters a lot. The world moves fast. Yesterday's newspaper is not worth anything, right? So, having a data set and content that is, there at the time you need it and is granular in terms of maybe the resolution. So maybe instead of weekly, you get it daily, that kind of thing. So the more frequent, the better. Relevant. So you're measuring things. Data is about is about a measurement of something interesting. And are you measuring something that's worthwhile? Are you measuring something that is an asset I can trade? If I have an insight, is there a way I can actually express this in the market? Versus sometimes we see a lot of kind of macro, big picture data. You can measure a lot of things. But it's hard to find data that speaks to something that's really, really relevant in the market. And then obviously the biggest one, I think, the most important is it needs to be unique. It needs to be something that people don't already have a good proxy for, that you don't already know, right? Tell me something I don't know. Why do you want a data product if it's not telling you something that's net new? So having unique content that really tells the market something that they haven't seen before, or it's information they can't get anywhere else. That's really important. So those are kind of the components when I think about what makes a product valuable. It kind of comes in all of those, right? It's the reliability. That's where we're talking about data, kind of the product structure. we talked about in the first part, and then the uniqueness of the content, the relevance, and the timeliness of it.
Awesome. And if I could just kind of double click on that for
Yeah.
a second, you mentioned, a life cycle of a product could be 2 years even. What are some of the harder parts of, those 8 supporting elements you just mentioned? Is it, after you get the data right, is it the business model takes 50% of the time? Is it?
Well, I think there are things that we can control in the process, and that's where, again, we're really focused as an organization on how do we build the data productization machine, right? And so the life cycle of we find something that's unique and interesting, either within our own walls or we find it externally. Once we have the data, it's a pretty formulaic process. We have an R&D process. We go through measuring, assessing the value, structuring it, and designing a product that's fit for a specific, the most appropriate use case. And then we have all the rails through which to deliver and maintain and sell the data. It's really, really the hard part is just finding that unique content, right? And like coming up with what are the right ways to, where should you look for new, unique insights? Again, like I said, sometimes people are still innovating and they're finding unique, interesting, ways to use pretty commoditized data like market data. But by and large, the long haul is just sourcing the content.
Yeah, makes sense. Speaking of innovating and changes, the pandemic brought a lot of change to all walks of life. I'd say, including various industries, and resulting in increased interest from retail investors in macroeconomic data and the whole rise of the retail investor phenomenon. How has Nasdaq responded to this new type of demand for data?
Yeah, well, I'll contradict myself immediately and say that during the pandemic, actually, data that wasn't interesting suddenly became, very interesting. Things like the kind of big picture macro things, supply chain. There was a lot of questions being asked that kind of weren't in the ethos before. Thankfully, we were positioned pretty well, I think, to adapt to that. So we acquired Quandl, which is an alternative data business and market data and data platform back in 2018. And so we've been working to take that as a kind of a foundation, and we've been building this kind of data productization machine on top of it. The operations, the people, the process, and the connections to go out and source data from the market. We talk to thousands of companies a year about the data assets that they have and how we could potentially help commercialize that and bring it to market in an efficient way. So we have this apparatus, and thankfully that allows us to pivot and be agile and bring to market some products quickly. So the pandemic brought, for example, lots of companies, had their whole operations disrupted. Probably none as many as airlines, as much as airlines. And a lot of big trades to make in airlines around the pandemic. So we had a lot of funds, a lot of firms come ask, hey, what can you tell me that's going to give me a read on global airlines or travel, hotels, that kind of thing. Another one is supply chain risk we mentioned. So we were able to bring an airline product to market. Actually, we have a couple in the travel industry as a result during the pandemic. And another example is the supply chain, like I mentioned. There was a pharmaceutical company in the early days of the pandemic. All of their manufacturing was in China and Italy, right? So like suddenly, their operations ground to a halt, right? They're no longer moving product. And so as an investor, you're like, hey, maybe I'm bullish on healthcare overall. It's a pandemic, after all, but there are specific areas where there's outsized risk or exposure. So supply chain data was really helpful there. So we were able to build some products around that. And then finally was the retail. That was the other big one. The participation of retail in the equity markets, especially, was just huge driver of change and interest in new, unique ways to kind of look at the market. So we were able to pivot pretty quickly on a new product that looks at how are the retail investors kind of expressing their opinions in the market. And we launched that, well within a year of kind of the pandemic starting, and that was actually made available to retail investors specifically as well through the platform. So we'd already had all these rails, all the infrastructure, and then it was just how do we get content out to market quickly, and that's kind of the whole line of thinking here is iterate fast and touch the market as much as possible, get something out there. If it works, great. If it doesn't, bring the next one. We lower the cost of curiosity. And the pandemic really helped us kind of flex our muscles there and build some muscle memory.
And do you think that phenomenon will continue? And more broadly speaking, you've talked a lot about how you launch data products. How do you make sure your data products continue to retain their value and integrity over time? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because data, like, it kind of decays. Not all products. Some products kind of break through and become kind of table stakes for the market. But a lot of unique kind of edgy data sets actually can decay over time. So that's something we think about. Like I mentioned, that uniqueness part. That's not static. If you find a data set that's unique, it doesn't always stay unique. Sometimes somebody else comes out with a different way to measure the same phenomenon, and suddenly that it's not worth anything anymore because you're not saying anything new. So you kind of always have to be in market and getting that feedback constantly. And so I'm kind of a broken record here, but how do we maintain the edge and the competitiveness of our products in what is a really competitive, dynamic space? Is you keep moving. And we just keep iterating, find new ways to either structure the products, deliver them. If you can't find new content, express the same content in different ways. Maybe that's more valuable for a different specific use case. Try to engage with customers and get further down kind of the value chain. Customers don't really want to buy data. They want to answer a question. So we think a lot about what kind of questions are customers asking. So keep moving, iterate, and then kind of specialize and find ways to adapt to specific use cases.
Mm-hmm. And do you spend more time iterating existing data products to tweak it, get it just right, adapt to changing need, or scouting greenfield new products? I imagine you do a lot of both.
Yeah, I was going to say it is a mix. I think of we have our flagship, obviously, market data products, and there's a lot of industry knowledge and expertise there. It's hard to innovate. It's hard to, there's regulated, obviously, products, but there's a lot we can do kind of around the edges outside of it. How do we make that data more useful? So in the sense, it's like, what can we do that's new, but that is complementary and amplifies the value of our already kind of very valuable market data? And then I think about the other kind of side of our product portfolio is about the new bets. I think that's like the venture portfolio almost. It's like, you take a lot of bets on products and content, because it's kind of hard to know what's gonna really break through with certainty. So we take bets. We try to put them out. We try to, lower the cost as much as possible, and then we hope that 1 out of 10 breaks through and is the next super successful thing. So I would say it's kind of a mix. Probably our team is, if you think about allocation of team, it's probably 50-50. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, really interesting to note that 1 out of 10 is the right ratio. I'm in the venture business, and 1 out of 10 would be a great ratio, but
yeah, it's aspirational.
If you'd be at 1 out of half or 1 out of 10, but that makes a lot of sense. Let's change gears here a little bit more to talk about kind of the latest transformation in the industry, which is AI. AI, I think, is changing all walks of life, and we're seeing tons of buzzworthy new products or companies. How has AI transformed data products and data product development from your perspective?
Well, I mean, you don't have AI or machine learning without data. So, I mean, that as a kind of starting point, having good quality data that is accurate, timely, says something new, all of those principles still apply. Probably even more so because you're not interacting directly with the data. Sometimes some of those problems actually, they stay hidden longer when data is being fed into an AI model and you're using the results, right? So, that's where the rigor and the quality starts to matter, maybe even a little bit more. But machine learning, kind of on the other side, like, how do we create products and get value from them? I mean, machine learning has been part of the process for a long time. In terms of data extraction, how do you get data from things like filings, sentiment analysis? We use a lot of machine learning in the data quality aspects. Statistically, is this data correct? Or data matching. Take like credit card or bank transactions. You have to match that to a company, right? And sometimes that takes a lot of machine learning expertise. Where I think Gen AI is really interesting is Gen AI is actually starting to take over some of those machine learning workloads, which I started as an engineer and we moved into, I was a data scientist and kind of worked in our machine intelligence group. So I have a pretty good familiarity with like what machine learning is and how AI works. I was very surprised at the power, the potency of some of the new Gen AI techniques and frameworks for replacing traditional statistical kind of based machine learning approaches in like non-intuitive ways. So I mentioned this credit card or bank transaction mapping. You have 120 characters to decide, like to interpret, to decide like which company is this? Is this Walmart? And track that, associated spending. That's a tough task even for humans. And so, we have built a lot of tools, fuzzy match logic and that kind of thing. Well, it turns out that like it's actually a really great problem for Gen AI if you know how to use it. And so, you can have these models go out and actually research and take a good guess and enrich the data so that you can enhance your mapping downstream. That's a very non-obvious use case. I think we'll continue to find those. So, we're starting to see that creep in, but it's still really, really early. What interests me more about Gen AI and kind of the time that we're in is what are data products going to look like? Like, how should they evolve as a result of this? Obviously, commercially, if I'm putting data into an AI model, there's a lot of like interesting commercial and IP questions that we're going to have to sort out. But more on the like from a product perspective, how do customers want to interact with data, right? How do they want to get value from the content that they're buying? We're seeing a big shift towards, or a big push coming out of like Silicon Valley and elsewhere towards like AI apps and AI interfaces, and not just chat, but using AI, in interesting, clever ways to help, have a more compelling, a deeper, richer, more valuable experience. I think this applies to data, and I wonder about how consumers want. Like I said, they're trying to answer a question. They're not trying to get data. And I think about if we all remember way, way, way back in time, when you wanted to listen to music, you had to download a file. You had like an MP3, and the whole like to get music, you had to move files around, put them on your iPod. It was an effort. But you didn't care about the files, you care about listening to music, right? And so now streaming, like when's the last time somebody's touched an MP3 file, right? Like you just stream the music. And I think that there is a future, and maybe not for all use cases, not for everything. If you're an audio engineer, you're probably still using, audio files. But I think for a lot of use cases, a lot of consumers, there will be a push or a pull maybe towards these kind of more interactive, richer experiences. Do customers need to get the data? Do they need to that's been the whole business, has been giving customers data, right? Do they need it anymore? So I think we need to really be thinking about that. And as a business, it's something we take really seriously.
And do you think data is, it's changing the way people access your products? Is it changing who your customers are? Maybe making it from data engineers to people on the business side or the sales side. Like, how does that look?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's an opportunity here to empower a whole new part of the value chain with the right kind of product. I think whenever technology always moves way faster than product, and people's expectations, consumer expectations, move even faster than technology. So product is always the lag. What's available in the market in terms of capabilities and tools is always a little bit or a lot behind what customers and consumers want. So, good product bridges that gap. And I think we're definitely thinking about how do we find ways to put new content, new experiences, new value add services in front of different parts of a workflow. And so not just, hey, we're feeding data into a backend, but can we power front office applications? Can we power customer experiences through, as a wholesaler, maybe through white label services for some of our larger, media clients or retail brokers. So there's a lot of opportunity there for sure.
In addition to just changing the data products, does that change your go-to-market and marketing strategy and even your team itself?
Yeah, it definitely will. I don't know how yet. And I think there's a lot of interesting commercial models to contemplate. I think we'll have to figure out what makes the most sense. You kind of got to grow where you're planted, right? Like what makes the most sense for our business and how we need to engage with customers. But time will tell. Yeah, but it's going to change for sure.
I'll ask one question, then I'll give it to you for some closing remarks. You mentioned how data integrity is the most important thing in your line of business. It all starts from there. And on the flip side, AI can help generate a lot of content, but is notoriously difficult to understand how it's generating what it generates. What do you guys? How do you think about the interaction between AI and your data, and losing some control as part of that process?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think it's complicated, right? I think there is probably a much larger domain of questions around who owns, the data that goes into a model, and who owns what the model weights and components are, and who owns the answers out the other side. I'm not a lawyer or legal expert. Again, we go back to can we be in the driver's seat with some of our products? I think I'd like to, as much as possible, kind of be ahead of that narrative. But certainly, I mean, I think there are some interesting questions for the business going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time to be in the data space and engineer. Just 1 minute left here, Bill. Any closing thoughts that you want to communicate to the audience?
Well, one, I think when we were chatting before, we talked about kind of picking on that thread of how do we empower a different kind of customer, a different kind of workflow, maybe one that's non-technical, maybe more business focused. So a few words of advice there for those business users who are maybe kind of like would be the consumers here. I think it's always a good idea to know how to tell a computer what to do is always going to be a useful skill, right? Just like knowing how to Google something well, like back when search came around, was useful skill, right? You don't need to be technical, but as much understanding as you can develop around how the models work, how the technology works, and how to interact with it. What are they good at? What are they bad at? That kind of thing is always going to serve you well. And I think the last thing to say is this is a tremendously exciting time with respect to AI, Gen AI, and data as a consequence. I think data is always exciting. And so just experiment, have fun. Let's go.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the time, Bill, and thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the day and the conference.